Thank you all for being here today and welcome. My name is Kaylani. I am the Vice Chair of the Health Research Council through the Society for Health Psychology. And this event that you're attending today is sponsored by the Health Research Council, and we're so glad you can join us. This event has been made available to all interested individuals, regardless of whether or not they are currently members of the society. We do want to note that to apply for the awards that we'll be discussing today, membership is required. And we hope that after today, those of you who are joining us, if you're not a member, you'll consider joining. And if you are a member already, we hope you will consider renewing for 2024. I do also want to just note a few logistics before we dive into the meat and potatoes of our time today. This event is being recorded, and so we just want to note that anyone who speaks during the event to ask a question or participate in any other way is agreeing to be recorded, and it's granting permission for the recording to be posted on our website. And we are going to ask that anyone who's not actively speaking to please keep your lines muted. After the presentations, anyone wishing to ask questions may unmute. And with no further ado, I'd love to begin by introducing our speakers who are here today. As you all know, you're here because we will be discussing the Graduate Student Research Awards that are sponsored through the Health Research Council, and we have the pleasure of having 3 recent recipients with us to share their wisdom and insight about the application experience. So first we have Cheyenne Reyes. She is a doctoral candidate from University of Rhode Island, and her grant award was for a project focused on mixed methods, a study of compassion fatigue in the US general population. We also have Elise McKelvey, who is a doctoral fellow at Medical College of Georgia at Augusta University, and her award was focused on CBT-based group intervention for patients with functional neurological disorder. And lastly, but not least, we have Denise Kochash, who is a doctoral candidate from the New School for Social Research, whose work was focused on an exploration of the relationship between endometriosis stigma, menstrual stigma, and depression. So before I turn it over to our panelists, I'm going to spend a little bit of time just reviewing some nuts and bolts of the application process. And then we'll get into arguably the more exciting part of our time today, which is hearing from our recent awardees. So first, I want to spend a moment just highlighting the awards that are available for this upcoming year. So the Society for Health Psychology sponsors 6 graduate student research awards each year. And these awards are for up to $2,000 in direct costs for your research activities. And we have a couple different categories of awards that I want to bring your attention to. So 4 of the awards are given to any project that covers a research area or focus in the area of health psychology. We also have 2 additional awards, one of which is to promote inclusion. And so this is really focused on increasing the number of scientists from underrepresented groups who are participating in health psychology research. And then we have 1 additional award that is focused on addressing health disparities. And so for this award, the award is for research that's focused on health disparities in terms of the nature of the research. So things like differences in the incidence and prevalence, mortality, or burden of diseases and other adverse health conditions that exist among specific population groups. If at any time you have questions about the content that I'm moving through, please feel free to unmute and chime in. And because one of our awards is focused on increasing inclusion within the area of health psychology research, I just wanted to note how we operationalize that for the purposes of administering these awards. And on the screen, I apologize, I know it's small print, and I'm actually not going to read through all of this language. This is on our website for you, and I encourage you to go and look through this. But what I do want to highlight today is just the broad scope with which we take to operationalizing the idea of promoting inclusion, and we draw on standards in the larger field from funding organizations like NIH to use our definitions of different identities and individuals from different communities that we would want to promote participation in research. And so that includes individuals from racial and ethnic groups that have been shown to be underrepresented in health-related sciences. But we also want to note that underrepresentation can vary across contexts. And so we encourage, if that feels relevant for you, making that there is space to make that case related to your specific environment in your application. We also want to note that we encourage inclusion related to varying abilities, including disabilities and broadly defined disadvantaged backgrounds. And once again, all of this language is on our website, so I encourage you to look at that in more detail. So big picture, the proposals for these awards are going to be due January 31st. You'll see I have an asterisk there. I'd want to note that this is a change. We've typically had a deadline of mid-January, but we recognize that for graduate students, mid-January is a particularly busy time. Oftentimes individuals are transitioning back after the holiday window, starting up a lot of responsibilities. And so we wanted to expand the window in January where individuals had time for being back online to put the finishing touches on this before getting it out the door. And the reason I have the asterisk is because this is new. We are updating our website to reflect this, but the website in some places has a deadline of January 15th, and we'll be addressing that. But for all intents and purposes, January 31st is our deadline. Eligibility for each of these awards includes being a full-time student enrolled in any degree conferring graduate program in psychology. The graduate program does not need to be specifically a health psychology program or a training track focused on health psychology or behavioral medicine. However, the nature of the research must fall within the scope of health psychology. And as I mentioned previously, students must be a current member of the Society for Health Psychology or Division 38. Details can be found online for the submission process with this link, but I'm going to just provide a brief overview of what the key components of the application are before we transition over to our panelists. So there are really two different parts of the application. We have a general Google form that all applicants must submit. You can access this online through the website. It's very brief. And the goal of this is to just gather some general information about your contact information, which awards you'd like to be considered for, things of that nature. However, the bulk of the application will go into a research packet that will ask you to upload via Dropbox, again, linked through our website. So this research application or packet will include several components: a cover letter, a title page, a detailed budget for how the funds will be used, a 6-page research strategy, an NIH-style biosketch, as well as a letter of recommendation from a faculty sponsor. You'll notice I have another asterisk here, and this is just to remind myself to note that this is one item where there is flexibility in how it's submitted. Some faculty sponsors are happy to share their letter with you. You can just include it in your PDF, all taken care of. However, if your faculty sponsor doesn't feel comfortable with that, they also are allowed to upload it directly through the Dropbox if they'd like to do that through independent pathways. And that's at the discretion of you and your faculty sponsor. And I encourage you to communicate about that so everyone's on the same page. So a few key items related to each of these components of the application. The cover letter, the focus of this is to indicate that you are a member of Society for Health Psychology. We ask you to state that explicitly in the application, and to explain to reviewers exactly how your research addresses a topic within the area of health psychology. The title page is pretty much your standard title page. This provides an overview of information about the project, how we contact you, your affiliation, and your sponsor's contact info and affiliation. The budget, I do want to point that we have an example budget on the website. For many individuals, this might be the first time that they're preparing a budget to submit with a grant application, and so we encourage you to use those resources. And there are specific details on the website to help ensure that the overview of the budget provides a full picture for the reviewers. So we not only want to know how the funds will be allocated within the project to ensure that there are appropriate uses of the funds, but also there are times when individuals have additional sources of funding to complement what they would receive through us, and that's important context to know that there are resources available if perhaps the scope is larger than what we would anticipate just from our funds, to make sure that this is feasible, what you anticipate doing. In terms of the research strategy, there are a few specific sections we want to highlight. Consistent with a typical grant application, including the NIH approach to providing a research strategy, we encourage you to include a specific aims page that's about 1 page in length. The focus of this is similar to an abstract, highlighting what are the research goals, what are the specific hypotheses. Of course, this is the space where you really can drum up enthusiasm about before you get into the nuts and bolts of the methodology of the project. So we encourage you to think about that as you shape your specific aims page as well. This will be followed by a background section. Again, we encourage you to think about keeping this closer to 2 pages. You want to be able to provide context for the research, what's been done, what are the gaps, and how is your project going to address the gaps that exist, all paving the way to the approach that you'll be using for the current project. So the method section, we encourage you to allocate the most space to this so you can be as transparent and complete as possible. And then I want to note that the references don't count towards the page limit, and we of course encourage you to be complete in referencing and citing the work or providing citations for the work you discuss. And there are formatting guidelines that we want you to follow. This includes using a 12-point font and a 1-inch margin for the full application. And we do want to note at this point in time that if you exceed the 6-page length, any information that comes on 7 pages and beyond won't be included. So it won't be considered in your review. And so it's really important to follow those guidelines. And as I provided an overview at the beginning, there are a few additional documents that you'll need to prepare and submit. This includes a bio sketch. So when you're preparing your bio sketch, we would like you to follow the NIH bio sketch guidelines for pre-doctoral fellows. If you're unfamiliar with this, you can Google it. You can follow the link that I have here. This is also available online on our webpage. But the important thing to note is there are 2 different NIH templates, and they require different information based on the developmental phase of the individual. And so we require the pre-doctoral fellowship version, and we just want you to be mindful of that when you're reviewing the templates. And then lastly, but not least, the letter of recommendation from faculty sponsors. Part of the goal of this is to verify that the proposed research is the student's project, that this isn't to be used for work that's really related to the sponsor's work or someone else's work in the lab, and that the student will function as the principal investigator for the research. So I think the big takeaway here is communicating with your mentor to highlight that one part of this is to ensure that from the sponsor, we're hearing from the sponsor that this is independent work. This is work that is focused on you advancing your own line of research aligned with your priorities and developmental goals. And then, of course, it's a great opportunity for them to share other great things about why you are a wonderful applicant for this award. And I want to wrap up by just mentioning the review process. So all applications will be sent to at least 2 independent reviewers through the Health Research Council. We make every effort to assign reviewers with content expertise related to grant topics. We bring in consultants as needed, and when possible, to ensure that individuals who are looking at your application have the content expertise to really give it a great shake. However, just as is the case with any grant review, including at NIH, it's important to remember that there might be reviewers who are not specific content experts in your topic area. So when you're preparing your application, you want to be thinking about hitting that balance between providing the level of clarity to demonstrate the scope of the work to a content expert, but balancing that with being mindful of jargon and avoiding relying on assumptions that someone who is in your specific content area might not need clarification on. And then all individuals will, all reviewers complete a standardized form, and then the 2 reviews are integrated and you will be provided feedback following this process. So one additional benefit of participating in this process is that you'll receive feedback from reviewers on your grant application and the project. And so this is an additional perk because it's not often, especially at the graduate school level, that you receive outside input and perspective, and it can really give that kind of like additional lens to how you communicate your work and how you're thinking about your work. It might provide things that you would want to incorporate into how you're approaching the project. All right. That's the end of my spiel. I'd love to pause for a moment to just see if there are any specific questions I can answer about those nuts and bolts before we turn over to our panelists. Okay. So now we will be turning over to our first panelists. Denise Kochash, if you could take it away.
Sure, yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Denise. I'm a 5th-year student now at the PhD program at the New School for Social Research in New York City, and I'm on my clinical internship at NYU Rusk right now. Just want to say thank you to Division 38 for the award and for having me here today. It's, it was really delightful to receive this award and to be able to present to all of you and kind of give you some suggestions. So my project was on, it was titled An Exploration of the Relationship Between Endometriosis Stigma, Menstrual Stigma, and Depression. And I think to me, the biggest advice that I would give for this process before anything else is really when you're working on this project, and for me especially, I would intermittently check in throughout with myself throughout the process. Just kind of like zooming out and trying to see it from the perspective of the person that's reading this. I really, really find that useful. I would ask myself, is what I wrote clear? Would it make sense to the reader? And in addition to that, the second piece of most important advice I have is really to have confidence in yourself and keep reminding yourself of that. It's sometimes hard to do that, I think, because there's so many people applying to grants such as this one, but to really keep at it despite, sometimes not wanting to. And the other thing is, I think we had a great overview just now of all of the requirements, but really to go on that website. I kept looking at the website. I really read the materials in detail and really take that information. And for me, what was useful is I took the information on the website, I put it in my Word document. I really broke it down to make sure I knew that I was addressing everything that was asked of me. So definitely that's another important piece of advice that I have. So in terms of like the different pieces, I think, we kind of talked about all of them. So for me, I really felt like the bio sketch and the cover letter In addition to including the information that was asked, I really felt that those two pieces of material were really like places for the applicant to shine and for me to shine, and not only to talk about my research project, but to also talk about like the other ways that I've been committed to the topic that my dissertation is about. So in my case, I worked for a nonprofit that was specialized in endometriosis, so I made sure to include that. I also made sure to include my commitment to health psychology. I've been a Division 38 campus representative for 3 years, so I made to include that in addition to saying that I'm a member of Division 38. So really, take the bio sketch and cover letter, include those things in addition to what's being asked of you. So the other things that were asked were like, what kind of research projects have you been on? What kind of research have you focused on so far? Things like that. I think the other thing about the cover letter is it's one of the first pieces of information that's seen. And you really want to make sure that your points are coming across very clearly. So it needs to be, I think it needs to be easy and quick to read. It needs to be convincing. And I do recommend, in addition to having a friend or somebody in the psychology field reading it, to have a friend who's not in psychology to read it as well, just because it needs to be so easy for that information to come across. So not having someone in the psychology field kind of look over it kind of makes sure that the information that you're communicating is coming out quickly and clearly. The title page is very easy. I'm not going to get into that. For the budget, I really thought it was useful to think carefully about what you like to spend the money on. I first thought to myself, oh, well, I'm reimbursing my participants for recruitment, so I need to include that. But then as I thought about that process in more detail, I realized I needed to expand my budget to include other things. So for example, was that I had to print posters and flyers to put up around places. I was like, wait a minute, I need a budget for that. So I included some additional things that came up later for me. So think carefully about what this grant is going to fund. And again, I think this needs to be quick and easy to read. And you might notice that you rewrite something that's in your research proposal. You're rewriting something in the budget and kind of explaining things again in the budget, which I think was okay. Like I did that, and I think it helped clarify the budget to repeat that information. The proposal itself was really, for me, it was the hardest part, and I had to think and plan carefully, and I thought it was really important to do that in advance. For me, this project was my dissertation, basically, or is my dissertation. I'm still working on it. So I was already at a stage where I had had my dissertation proposal. My committee had reviewed it. So 3 researchers had already gone through it and really given me some good feedback, and I had taken that feedback and integrated it in. So it was already in, I think it went through that quality control stage where people scrutinized it and really gave me good feedback. So if you haven't done that, or if you haven't done it already, I really recommend your research advisor, meeting with your research advisor, going through this proposal, asking them to challenge you in the parts where they think that, hey, this might be a question that the people reviewing this application might have, and really working on that to perfect those areas, I think is really, really important. So meeting with your research advisor and getting their feedback is one critical piece of advice I have there. And again, just remembering to put yourself in the reader's shoes as you're drafting your proposal and preparing it. So thinking to yourself, are certain parts of what I've included in the methods section not clear? Would somebody have a question about this? And addressing those parts that you think need to be clarified a little bit more. I thought also I included some diagrams in my proposal. So anywhere you can, again, get information across clearly and quickly, and there are diagrams that could help support what you're including in your proposal, I think is extremely important. So I encourage people to also include those. And again, in addition to meeting with your research advisor, having a friend to go over your proposal, providing you with edits too. So you don't want to have too many people looking at it. I don't find that useful personally, but it's definitely useful to have one or two people go over it and challenge you with certain parts of it. So that's all from me. Happy to answer any questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. I was taking notes of things that especially stood out to me. I think you used the term quality control, but this idea of using your network and the various individuals in your network who can be a part of supporting you in this process and provide different types of feedback about your application. Also, in the start of your review highlighting just believing in yourself, I think one of the things folks don't realize when they're writing a grant is those things come through. And so I love that you highlighted the importance of that, especially for anyone who might be jumping into this for the first time, reminding yourself that you're capable and, one foot in front of the other. And then lastly, just that takeaway of quick and clear communication. That is just so key in thinking creatively about how to do that. So thank you for all of that. And we'll make sure everyone's available at the end for additional questions. I'm going to turn it over to Elise McKelvey.
Hi, y'all. So happy to be here as well. You'll see that one sound is one box and my face is another box. Sorry, technical difficulties. I don't want to be too redundant with what Denise had to say. I agree with everything that you have had to say. I think when I was thinking about what I wanted to propose, one of the ways that I was able to feel confident is because I had already done my dissertation. And so I really leveraged the things that I learned there to make this really as professional as I could. And I know that for some folks that might sound silly, but really following APA guidelines, the guidelines that are laid out for you by Division 38 is very helpful. And in terms of deciding the actual project, I wanted to look for a gap in the literature, but I also wanted to look for a gap in the real world around me. And I knew that a clinic that I had been working in, we have desperately wanted to shorten our insanely long wait list. We talk about it all the time, how we might do it. And so it was very helpful for me to be able to pitch this idea to first the team, say, hey, do I have the green light to even propose this to Division 38 and apply for this award? And they were very happy to have me apply and to support me in that. I think if you can have a letter writer, I know Caroline did say there's some wiggle room here, but I think a strength of my application was that my letter writer was intricately connected to this clinic. He's the head psychologist there, and he knows me very well. So he was able to write me quite a strong letter of recommendation, and that was very helpful. In terms of the budget, I think I am using the vast majority of the money to pay my participants. And then I'm using a decent chunk to pay for online MMPI-2 administration, which I'm just ecstatic about, that I don't have to score that will come through Q Global for me. So it's great because it also gives me a lot of my time back because that's a big lift. And then I also use some of the money for printing of things that will go directly to the participants. Another thing about deciding about my study was that I knew that I'd be able to get the participants quite easily. And I think that was probably a strength because they are already standing in a waiting list. So that was good. I don't think I have too much more to add. Again, don't want to be redundant and want to give you guys opportunities to ask questions. So maybe I'll stop there and y'all can ask questions at the end.
That's great. Thank you so much. I just want to highlight, again, such an important point, the value of having a strong letter writer and someone who can really speak to you and the work that you're doing and the feasibility and capacity of you as an applicant to conduct the project that you're proposing. So that close communication, again, with your network to the extent that that's possible, can really strengthen an application. All right, thank you so much. I'm going to now turn it over to Cheyenne Reyes, last but not least.
Hi, everyone. So there's been a lot of really great advice given, I guess, some places where I could fill in some gaps. So the project that I used for this grant is my dissertation study, which is a mixed method study, which is a bit of a bear and also kind of incorporates some of that qualitative research, which I saw someone mention there. And I would say that my biggest advice for both the cover letter and for the grant application itself would really be to emphasize clarity and directness. So something that I found really valuable in terms of in particular cutting to basically two method sections and two intros in a way was being very direct and utilizing things that really emphasize the clarity and the direction that my research is going. So labeling a lot of different sections, making sure that my qualitative and quantitative sections were demarcated. So that was something that I felt really helped me in conveying what I wanted the readers of this grant to see, which was that it's a qualitative and it has qualitative and quantitative methods, and that those things are listed as clearly as possible with the space that we're given. So those are the things that I really tried to emphasize there. In terms of budget, my budget was a bit interesting. So I used all of my budget for recruiting through Prolific, which is a great website to recruit large data sets. I'm just trying to pull that up right here. And I was in a unique position where I had a small grant and I kind of used a lot of space there to justify how this grant would supplement the small grant that I had already received. So really using that space to justify what you're using those funds for, and in particular, why Prolific out of anything else that I could use this money for, how it adds to my study, and how it allowed me to recruit a sample reflective of the US population, which is something that's very important to the purposes of my study, looking at compassion fatigue in the general population. So I would definitely say if you only have like one thing that you need to use the money for, that's fine as long as you justify it well. In terms of the bios, and kind of hopping off of that before I get into the bio sketch, I think a really great way to build confidence in writing a grant like this is applying to other grants as well. So no matter how big or how small, like the small grant that I got before this was about $500. So not necessarily like a F-31 or anything like that, but um it was good for me to kind of get what I wanted down on paper, look at it again and see how I would revise it per this grant's parameters. So it really helps in distilling the nuts and bolts that you want to get across of your study, because every grant is different, and figuring out what to emphasize and what goes and what stays between grants can be really useful in building that confidence for the grant writing process in general. Oh, and in terms of the bio sketch, that was definitely something that was very different. And this is the first time I'd ever seen a bio sketch before. So I would definitely say if you have your bios, like once you get that bio sketch template, also pull out your CV and try to pull different threads from different areas of your research experience. So even if you have like a different degree before this one, just kind of writing this thread or this narrative of how this next step, this research project, is a continuation of your story thus far, I think really helped me market myself and market this study as a continuation of what I've been doing for years up to this point. And that's all I got. Thank you for your time.
Again, so many great points. Thank you. A few things that stuck out to me. I just love how you use the term marketing yourself and the project. And I think one thing that's really different about grant writing, grant writing is just a different type of science writing than a lot of the other types of writing that we do. And so there's this salesperson element to writing a grant that's really important. It's almost like a hat you have to put on to approach how you're thinking about this in a different way. And to that point, you mentioned the idea of different ways of approaching the budget and not only thinking about why you need this tool for your project, but why that tool is specifically the right tool when there might be other versions available, is a really important point for just buttoning up every angle of the grant to that the reviewer walks away saying like, this all makes just tons of sense. It made sense from start to finish. And I think that brought to mind one other idea of, some of these different pieces, like the bio sketch being a new process for many folks who are applying, and the idea of pulling up your CV to really think about how you're talking about yourself and experience and making sure that's represented in your bio sketch is such a great tip. But making sure to take that step back and saying from start to finish, the goal is to sell to the reviewer, this is an important project that needs to be done. This is a great way to answer the question that needs to be answered, and I'm the person to answer it. And so again, integrating that thread across your letter writer, your bio sketch, your application is a great way to ensure that you're putting together a strong grant. So thank you to all three of our panelists for their wonderful insights about this process. We now have about 20 minutes to turn it over to Q&A. So we'd love to hear from those of you who are on the line to throw out some questions. You can unmute yourself and chime in, or many folks have been putting questions in the chat, which I'm monitoring as well. But please take advantage of this opportunity to ask our panelists any and all questions.
Hi, thank you everybody. This was so helpful. I just have a quick question about the feasibility component. And I guess just maybe like an example would be helpful to the extent that we should show recruitment would be feasible. And I'm thinking in terms of how my mentor herself wouldn't have access to the population of interest, but we've evidenced collaborations to access the populations of interest. So I just wonder, and I presume this would go probably in the letter and then also in our proposal, but I guess I just would like to get more information to how much to try to prove that this could be feasible.
Would any of our panelists like to chime in to specifically speak to that?
I can. I mean, I think it will only strengthen your application to talk about feasibility. If it's the most amazing study in the world on the rarest population that cannot be accessed, then it's a really difficult study to complete. I think, you get some feedback, like Kaylani mentioned, and a lot of the feedback that I got was to the effect of, it seems like this person can really implement this. So I do think that it's something that they're paying attention to. I don't think you mentioned this in the beginning, Kaylani, but you have to provide a brief summary of where your research stands a year and a half later. Am I remembering that correctly? Do you guys have any expectations about what is expected to be completed by that time point?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm just going to pull up my notes on the timeline for the research report. So I think what you're alluding to is the research report, correct?
Yeah.
So just to clarify that for everybody, it's typically at the start of the academic year, so around the 1st of September, all awardees are asked to submit and required to submit a report on their progress on the grant. And we don't necessarily have specific requirements for what we would expect to see, but this is a mechanism to, this is standard across funding mechanisms. So NIH expects you to submit a report every year to let them know about the progress of the work that you said you would do. And that's exactly how this is meant to function as well. And so we don't necessarily have benchmarks that we expect to see because of just we have a range of students at different phases in the program, at different phases of the research, and so it's difficult. But I think to your point, we want to see that there is progress being made consistent with what you said you would do with the money, right? That's the agreement that's being made. In terms of just another thought on this idea of feasibility, I think Elisa's points are spot on, that feasibility is in the mind of the reviewer, right? And I think by the time you get to this point, this is probably a project related to your thesis or your dissertation. And so there's a lot of discussion that happens in that context related to feasibility. And so I would lean on that as well. But in terms of, it sounds like maybe there are concerns about the degree to which it will be perceived as feasible, but there is work being done to ensure that the project can be completed that you're interested in doing. And I think, again, keeping in mind that thread, keeping the thread throughout, so highlighting not only having your research mentor speak to the feasibility, in the project, you'll want to speak to the feasibility. So you'll note in the research proposal, we encourage you to conclude with anticipated challenges. And so a great way to address anticipated challenges is not only saying, here's why this could be hard, but here are the things we have done because we anticipate that challenge. And that's a great way to really strengthen that. But then again, in the budget as well, here's all the scaffolding in place for us to be able to recruit these participants if there are costs related to what you've been developing to ensure you can do the project. So any place you can consistently remind the reviewer. I think like another grantsmanship rule of thumb is the idea, if there's something important, say it a lot, because there's always a chance a reviewer might miss the one line that you have. So if you're worried about that, say it as many times as you can fit it in. That makes sense. Great question. Other questions? Can keep us moving. So one thing that I'm curious from all of you, the deadline is the end of January in terms of thinking about making progress on this. Any recommendations on like amount of time to be thinking about allocating between now and the end of January to pull together a strong and complete application?
I would say it definitely depends on how well versed you are in the topic already. Like for me, I already essentially had my introduction. I care a lot about this topic. I know why it's important. I know why you should think it's important. So that part was done essentially. But if you need to do a full literature review and really build that up, for me personally, that can be something that takes a lot of time, maybe counterintuitively, especially because it's so short. How can I tell you so much and really convince you with 2 pages?
I would agree with that. I think it took me only a couple weeks to put mine together because it was part of my dissertation proposal. I'd already applied to another grant, so it didn't take me necessarily a lot of time. But if you're starting from scratch, you're definitely going to want to put forth a lot of time to make sure that you know the subject area, you know the methods, and you can state all of that concisely.
Yeah, same with me. I mean, I had my dissertation proposal already prepared. I really took parts of that and kind of like shortened that to adjust it to this. And then obviously I had to think about, one thing that was new to me was thinking about the budget and kind of writing about the budget. So I had to think about that in a little bit more detail. But similarly, it took me around 2 weeks or so, but only because I had the materials already ready.
Other questions? I'm thinking about anyone who might be on the call thinking, I'm not sure about biting this off. What would you all say to someone who's not sure about taking on the challenge of writing a full grant to fund their own work? Pros and cons, things to consider.
I think the pros, I think one of them was already mentioned, was it really like gives you good experience preparing a grant and knowing what to expect, especially if you want to get into this field in the future and be a researcher who is applying to grants. I think it was really important for me for that. And it really gave me the confidence to apply to other grants. So after that, I applied to 3 more. One I just submitted like yesterday, actually. And I got a second one after this. So, this was the first grant I had ever applied to. So it really, really built up my confidence. And even if you don't get it, I think it's amazing experience. And, I think anyone should keep at it and keep applying to more. Yeah.
Great points.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Even if it's just an exercise to submit it and practice and you don't get it, you still learned a lot. And I think that is valuable in and of itself.
I would agree with all of those points. And I think in a way, writing a grant gets you more in touch with your research too, because again, like you go from like a 15, 20 page, or actually more, if we're being honest, dissertation proposal. You go from a huge dissertation proposal or, something that you could write a lot about, and you have to distill the most important parts of the study into only a couple of pages. And it's a task, but it's kind of in that task that you figure out what's really, really important and what things you really need to emphasize going forward. And I think that especially if you're in the process of conducting, writing up, defending your dissertation, that can be really valuable because that shows like, okay, here, these are the places that I really need to have a good case for and strengthen as well. So it's definitely something I'm going to be looking back at as I get ready to defend for sure.
I have a question actually that might be helpful for folks to hear the answer to. When you are translating your CV into the bio sketch, do people recommend having a direct kind of copy of your CV or really only kind of pulling out the things that most highlight why you're a good candidate for this grant?
Yeah, such a great question. I think there are a lot of ways to approach this, especially at this developmental phase. And Josh, if you're available, I would love for you to chime in on this as well. I think, the point of the bio sketch in general for the grant submission is to show I am a good fit for the role that I'm going to be playing. And so for the purposes of this grant, you're the PI, you're the star of the show, and here's why I am a good fit. I think, as individuals become more senior in their career, the point of that is to say, here are the things that I've done that show I have the expertise that I need to do this. I think at this phase, when you're in graduate school, the focus is shifted more to here, let me tell you the story of how I ended up right here. And this is the thing that I am so excited about because all of the things I've done so far have led me to this being the next step for me, and kind of distinguishing. So often there can be this blurring of how much is you, how much is your lab and your mentor. And this is a great space to show your passion for the work you're doing as your independent line of research. But I think there's a lot of ways to do this, right? So I want to put a big asterisk next to that. Josh, I see your check here. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this question.
I don't have much to add to that. That was just a great explanation of what it is. I would just emphasize what you said, that this is the opportunity that you have to talk about yourself and how this project fits into, what you've been doing. And, going back to the selling yourself piece of it, because everything in this entire document is about selling yourself. Like when you're describing your work and how this project, comes at the end of this line of work that you've done, you really want to sell that as a narrative. So you don't really want to sell it as like, I've done these three like disconnected things that are very different, but it shows that I'm a good researcher. You want to really talk about how your thinking drew a track through those three types of work that you were doing, leading to this proposal. Even if some of that was retroactive, now that you're in the moment, you have to learn to tell that story as a proactive line.
Thanks, Josh.
Good. Cool.
Yeah, that was perfect.
Y'all, I'm so happy to see so many of you here. This is so exciting. I think that these awards are one of the really cool things that the society does. And we are looking to pick awesome people to give these awards. So it's so great to see so many people here.
Thanks, Josh. Elise, how does that answer sit with you? Good question. So we have about 7 minutes left. Are there other questions from those of you who are listening? So another question for the panelists. Would you approach anything differently now that you've been through it? Is there anything you would have tweaked if you were to undertake this process again? Something that you learned from doing it, something in the feedback that you got?
I guess the feedback that I got that I have most kind of integrated into the rest of this is related to power, kind of something that I already knew in my head, that this is a small study of group therapy to groups. Group therapy can't be that big, or it's not good group therapy. And so I could have just addressed that a little bit stronger in my proposal. But then it also has impacted the amount of variables that I was originally going to work with versus what I'm now working with. Even though I accept that it's going to be underpowered no matter what, I still want to be conscientious of that.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I think, correct me if you disagree with this, but thinking about if you were to revisit the application process, thinking about those that limitation section, that sounds like a perfect example of that idea of this is a limitation, but here's why it's important to do it this way and what we're going to do to make this work.
Exactly, totally agree.
Cheyenne, Denise, anything that comes to mind?
I think for me, both the people who reviewed mine had a comment about the power and the power analysis. So I think I would have made that section a little bit stronger. Yeah. So in the end, I had done a power analysis, and I ended up recruiting far more people than I had originally planned, so I think it worked out fine. But definitely something I would have strengthened in my application.
That's a great point. And I'll just jump in to say that things like the power analysis are often treated as sort of just a toss-off thing that you have to do. But when it comes to a grant proposal, they're very, very important information. So we will critically interrogate things like your power analysis. So being mindful going into it that we're going to ask ourselves questions about, okay, you made that choice, but why that choice? Why that population? Why are you excluding all those other folks? And with your power analysis, you said this many people, but you didn't give us a good rationale for why you picked that effect size, right? So like actually really thinking through it, that's something that we'll do.
That's a great point, Josh. And it's also making me think about the comment that, or the question that came up earlier about speaking to feasibility. And I think power is another place where that's really considered. And you have the opportunity to speak to that. And once again, make the case for why power might not look like the ideal version of power if you were funded at a totally different level than we typically are as grad students. Cheyenne, I want to make sure you have an opportunity if you had anything to add on to that question before we wrap up here.
Yeah, I apologize. I was looking for the feedback in my email, but it's a little buried for better or worse. But I think something that I would change looking back at my application would definitely be using a bit more of the space to justify my methods, especially the qualitative methods. I feel like in particular with qualitative research really being descriptive and putting a lot of attention towards why these methods are warranted, especially specific methods within a mixed methods research study is really important. So that's definitely something that I've been keeping in mind moving forward as well.
When we start talking about the statistics and the methodology, I always want to weigh in. So yeah, we're wide open to qualitative research. I'm a mixed methods researcher. People think that qualitative is really only has to be descriptive, but there's a lot of rigor that goes into good qualitative work, and we're going to want to see that. So want to hear about your positionality, want to see how you're addressing trustworthiness in the research. There's really good information out there about what rigor looks like with qualitative research, and we'll be using that when we read it. So keep that in mind. But that should also encourage you to put in an application with qualitative work, because like we take it that seriously.
Yeah, thank you both for bringing that up. I'm not sure if you saw, but in the chat, someone was mentioning whether or not we're open to qualitative work, and we absolutely are. We're excited about the diverse methodology that's not only exciting but necessary to move the field forward. But to Cheyenne and Josh's point, in general, across methodologies, we will hold it to the standard of conducting rigorous research to make sure that it's the contribution that everyone wants it to be. So we are coming down the last moment. Any buzzer beater questions from anyone before our time with our panelists is up? Okay, I just want to thank the three of you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us. Congratulations on your recent awards. We hope the work is progressing well, and we just really appreciate you sharing your time with us today. And thank you all for being here. Again, we encourage you to consider applying. A reminder that Society for Health Psych membership is necessary for that. And we hope you'll consider, and we're glad you could spend time with us today.
Thanks so much, and good luck to the applicants.
Thank you.